Have you ever sat alone on your birthday waiting for the phone to ring, only to hear nothing? Maybe you watched the sun go down on Mother's Day or Thanksgiving or even Christmas, and that little part of you, quiet but still hopeful, kept checking your messages, just in case. But nothing came. If you've been there, you're not alone. And no, you're not being too sensitive. That ache in your heart, it's real. It's the echo of love given, years, even decades of it, now feeling unanswered. And that hurts. Especially when it comes from the very people you once held in your arms, stayed up late for, made sacrifices for, your children. So what do you do with that pain? That mix of disappointment, confusion, maybe even a little shame for caring so much? Well, today we're going to talk about it. Really talk about it. Not with bitterness, not with blame, but with strength, clarity, and yes, with peace. Because you can respond in a way that honors your feelings without letting those feelings consume you. And when you do, something shifts. You become free. Let's take a moment to understand why this cuts so deep. You see, much of our pain as parents comes from the emotional investments we made when our children were young. We built our world around them. Their joy was our joy. Their safety, our priority. We didn't just raise them. We loved them with a kind of intensity that only a parent knows. So when they forget us on the days that matter most, it doesn't feel small. It feels like we've disappeared. But here's the truth you might need to hear today. You haven't disappeared. You are still here, still worthy, still valuable. And how others behave does not erase your presence, your love, or your legacy. Now, does that mean it's easy to let go of the pain? Of course not. But responding without bitterness doesn't mean pretending you're okay. It means choosing not to let their absence take away your inner peace. Let me ask you something. When your kids forget your birthday, what is your first instinct? For many of us, it's silence. We shut down. We get quiet. We try to act like it doesn't bother us, while a storm brews inside. But here's the problem with silence when it comes from hurt. It doesn't heal. It hardens. It festers. So the first step is this: acknowledge what you feel, without judgment. If you're angry, say it. If you're sad, feel it. If you're disappointed, name it. There is nothing weak about feeling emotions. In fact, pretending we don't have them is what makes us bitter. You don't have to shout it from the rooftops. You don't have to call your kids and guilt trip them. But in your own space, say it out loud. That hurt me. That day mattered to me. And I felt forgotten. You'll be amazed how powerful it is just to tell the truth to yourself. Once you've allowed yourself that honesty, the next step is to choose what story you want to believe. This part is important, because the mind loves to fill in the blanks. If your son didn't call, maybe your brain starts spinning. He doesn't care. He's selfish. I must not matter to him. And on and on. But what if that's not the truth? What if he's overwhelmed, lost in the stress of work, parenting, bills, or even his own inner struggles he hasn't told you about? What if it wasn't about you, but about him being human, flawed, distracted, or even emotionally immature? Now, that doesn't excuse the behavior, but it does offer you an off-ramp from resentment, because resentment is just pain that's been left to rot. It poisons your peace without solving anything. And the story we choose, whether it's that we're unloved or that others are simply flawed like us, determines the weight we carry. That brings me to the next thing you can do, something simple but profound. Create your own ritual of remembrance. Yes, your children may forget your birthday, but you don't have to. You don't have to let the day pass in silence. You can light a candle, buy yourself your favorite treat, write yourself a letter, call a friend, even share your day with someone who does remember. And before you say, "But it's not the same," you're right, it isn't. It's not the same as your child remembering, but it is something. It's dignity. It's self-love. It's a declaration that you still count, even if they forgot. We all carry the tension between wanting to be seen and fearing we'll be rejected. And when our children forget us, both of those wounds are triggered at once. But healing doesn't come from making them feel guilty. Healing comes from standing in your own light, even when they remain in the dark. So if no one told you this year, happy birthday. You matter. Your presence on this earth matters. Your story matters. Your love, your laughter, your scars, your strength, all of it matters. You've made it through so much, and you're still here. Now, if you're wondering whether you should bring it up to your children, that's a personal choice. There's no one right answer. But here's something to consider. Speak to be understood, not to wound. If you do choose to say something, don't say it on the day when you're hurting the most. Wait. Let the storm pass. Then, in a quiet moment, with calm in your voice, you might say something like, "I know life gets busy, but when my birthday passed without a call, it stung. I just want you to know that those moments still matter to me." No blame, just truth. And if they respond with kindness, hold on to that. If they respond with defensiveness, let that be their struggle, not yours. You've spoken your truth with grace. That's enough. Let's pause here for now because I want to walk with you through the rest of this, step by step, without rushing. Because this isn't just about birthdays. It's about identity, memory, respect, and how to keep your heart open without letting it be broken again and again. You've already taken the most important step. You're here, listening, thinking, feeling, and I'm honored to walk this path with you. And maybe right now, part of you is wondering, but what's the point in caring if they won't change? That's a fair question. When you've given so much love, and it feels like you're getting so little in return, it's natural to want to stop trying. To shut the door and say, "Enough, I'm done." But here's the quiet truth I've learned, and maybe you've felt it too. Walking away may protect us from pain, but it also starves us of connection. The challenge is to protect your heart without closing it. Let's talk about something many of us carry, but rarely say out loud. The fear that we've become less important as we've aged. Not because we're any less valuable, but because the world we once centered, our families, our homes, even the holidays, now seems to move on without us. That shift is hard, especially when we feel forgotten on days that used to be filled with handmade cards, hugs, and laughter at the dinner table. So how do we cope with that shift? How do we adjust without bitterness creeping in? Start by remembering this. You are not just a parent, you are still a person. A whole, beautiful, complicated person with a life that is not finished. Your story didn't end when your last child left home. It didn't end when the calls got fewer or the visits more strained. It certainly didn't end when they forgot your birthday. We are taught to center our lives around our children, and that's not a bad thing, especially when they're young. But eventually, if we're not careful, we make their presence, or their approval, the measure of our worth. And when that approval doesn't come, we feel like we've failed. But that's not the truth. That's just a story we were handed. And it's time to rewrite it. Now, I want to offer you a tool, something simple but powerful. Practice emotional distance without emotional coldness. What does that mean? It means you can love your children without clinging to their attention. You can value them without expecting them to fulfill your needs. You can remain open-hearted without opening yourself up to repeated hurt. You don't have to reply right away when they finally text after missing your birthday. You don't have to act like nothing happened. You can take your time, breathe, respond when you feel ready, not when guilt or habit tells you to. It also means creating a little space in your soul where their behavior doesn't determine your mood. That takes practice, but it's a practice worth pursuing. Because peace of mind is better than the temporary high of a returned call or a last-minute apology. You're not cold. You're calm. There's a big difference. let's take a moment to talk about boundaries. Yes, even now. Because many of us grew up thinking that being a parent meant sacrificing everything. And it did, for a time. But boundaries are not walls. They are the way we teach others how to treat us, even when we're 60, 70, 80 years old. If your child only reaches out when they need something, and never when it's your birthday or a holiday, you have the right to say, kindly but clearly, I need to feel valued too. Not just when it's convenient. Now, will they always respond well? Probably not. Especially if they're used to you being endlessly available. But speaking your truth, even gently, isn't about their comfort. It's about your dignity. It's often been said that love and guilt are deeply intertwined. And how true that is, especially for parents. So many of us feel guilty for setting limits. Guilty for admitting we're hurt. Guilty for even wanting more. But what if you let go of that guilt? What if you realize that protecting your emotional health is not selfish but wise? There is nothing noble about allowing yourself to be dismissed over and over again. There is quiet strength in saying, I love you, but I also love me. Here's another thing to keep in mind. Don't assume your children see your silence as strength. Sometimes we think, I won't say anything. They'll figure it out. But often they don't. They're too busy, too distracted, or too caught up in their own lives to even notice the silence. And while it's not your job to chase them down emotionally, it is okay to speak up when it matters, without expecting a perfect response. One woman I know decided to write a letter to her adult daughter after a forgotten birthday. Not to scold her, but to remember herself. She wrote about her childhood, the joy she felt when her daughter was born, and the hope she still held for their relationship. It wasn't a guilt trip. It was a window, a glimpse into her heart, and it changed things. Maybe not overnight, but something softened. Because the truth is, sometimes our children need reminding that we are still here, not just as their parents, but as people with feelings, memories, and birthdays that still matter. And yet there are times when even those gentle efforts are met with silence. That's when the deepest work begins, not in changing them, but in anchoring yourself. What does that look like? It looks like choosing joy, even if it's quiet. It looks like surrounding yourself with people who do remember. It looks like finding purpose in places you might not have looked before. In volunteering, in writing, in tending a garden, in starting something new. It means saying yes to life, even if your kids sometimes say no to you. And no, it's not easy. It takes courage to rebuild your center when the people you love most drift from it. But I promise you, there is still beauty in your days. There is still meaning in your presence. There is still someone out there who needs your smile, your story, your spirit. Bitterness is the slow death of joy. But you don't have to go that way. Not today. Not ever. Instead, you can let go, not of love, but of the weight that's crushing it. You can stop waiting for that call that may or may not come and start living now. Fully. Freely. And with the quiet confidence that your life, your whole life, still matters. Sometimes we get caught in this silent cycle of waiting for them to remember, waiting for a text that never comes, waiting for a moment that tells us we still matter. And while that hope isn't wrong, living only in that hope can rob us of the life still in front of us. Because here's something that doesn't get said enough. You deserve joy even if your children never give it to you. You deserve to be celebrated even if the people you raised no longer celebrate you. Your worth is not tied to who calls you or who doesn't show up for dinner. It lives in you. It always has. When we rely on others to validate our value, we give them too much power. That's not love. That's dependence. And the older we get, the more we must return to ourselves, not in loneliness, but in strength. Think of it this way. What if your life from now on became less about being remembered and more about remembering yourself? You could wake up on your birthday and say, "This is the day I entered the world. This is the day I began writing the story that's still unfolding, and I'm going to honor that. Not just for who remembers me, but for who I've become. Buy the flowers. Wear your favorite clothes. Make a meal you love. Light a candle and sit with your memories. Not in sadness, but in quiet gratitude for the journey. Every wrinkle, every scar, every gray hair, they are proof that you've lived, loved, endured. And if tears come, let them. They're not a weakness, they're a form of release. They remind us that we care, and caring is not something to be ashamed of. Mourning is a necessary act of letting go, not just of people, but of expectations. When we mourn what we hoped a moment would be, we clear space for what it can be. Letting go doesn't mean giving up on your children. It just means choosing not to let their absence define your reality. Because if you only feel worthy when you're remembered, then every silence becomes a wound. But if you know your value, then even the silence becomes just another passing moment, not a verdict on who you are. Some of the most peaceful people I've met in later life have one thing in common. They've stopped chasing after people who consistently forget them. Not in anger, but in acceptance. And they've started pouring that love into new spaces. Friendships, neighbors, younger people who need mentoring, even strangers they meet at the market or on morning walks. They've learned that giving love isn't just for those who used to live in their home. It can also be for those who cross their path now. Because the heart never runs out of room. It just needs new doors to open. So ask yourself this: what doors am I willing to open now? Maybe it's reconnecting with someone from the past. Maybe it's reaching out to someone else who feels forgotten. Or maybe it's simply reconnecting with yourself. Because you are still allowed to grow. Still allowed to dream. Still allowed to laugh so hard that your belly aches. Still allowed to fall in love with a hobby, a place, or even a new person. And yes, still allowed to be celebrated, even if you have to be the one to light the candles. You didn't raise your children so they would become the center of your identity forever. You raised them so they could find their own strength. And now it's your turn to do the same for you. You are not needy for wanting to be remembered. That's human. That's real. But you are free to stop begging for scraps of attention from people too distracted to see the gift in front of them. Because you are a gift. You've lived through wars, heartbreaks, triumphs, laughter, loss. You've shown up when others didn't. You've built, you've nurtured, you've healed. And now, the most important relationship you'll ever tend to is the one you have with yourself. Forgive them, if you can. Not because they asked, but because carrying resentment is like drinking poison and hoping someone else will feel it. Let it go, not for their peace, but for yours. And if they do reach out, don't punish them. That doesn't mean you have to pretend like nothing happened. But meet them with grace. Let them see that you are bigger than the moment they forgot. You are not a calendar entry. They forgot a date, yes, but you never stopped being someone worth remembering. It's okay to say, "Thank you for calling. I did miss hearing from you. My birthday matters to me." That's not guilt. That's clarity. That's emotional honesty. And if they love you, they'll hear it. And if they don't, you'll still be okay. Because now, you've learned how to give yourself what you were waiting for from them. Respect, kindness, and care. So many people in your generation were taught to give, until there was nothing left. But giving from an empty cup is not noble. It's draining. You're allowed to fill your cup now. You're allowed to rest, to receive, to be enough without doing anything more. You are not invisible. You are not expired. You are not past your time. You are timeless. And if you needed a sign to keep living fully, to stop waiting for permission to celebrate yourself, this is it. Speak your truth. Guard your peace. Be gentle with your heart. And remember, the best revenge for being forgotten is to thrive anyway. So, if you've ever been overlooked on a birthday, if you've ever felt invisible during the holidays, if you've ever wondered whether anyone still sees you, I see you. And you are not alone. There is a whole world of people out there. People who do remember, who do care, who are waiting to meet someone like you. But first, you have to open your heart again, not for their sake, but for yours. And I want to leave you with this. You don't need a text, a cake, or a card to prove your worth. All you need is the willingness to show up for yourself, day by day, moment by moment, with tenderness and courage. You've spent a lifetime showing up for others. Now it's time to show up for you. Thank you for being here, for listening, for feeling, for healing. If this message touched you, share your story in the comments below, because someone else may need your words, just like you needed this moment. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and come back anytime you need a reminder. Your life still matters. Your voice still matters. And there is always room for joy at any age. Here's to living with open hearts, even after disappointment. Here's to love that starts with you. And here's to birthdays that are never forgotten, because you remembered. Take care of yourself. You are deeply worthy of everything good.